Hi, Rick here, and today I'm going to ask a very complex question that is definitely going to take 10 minutes to answer. What is the content of a starship's shuttle bay? Shuttles? No, wait, come back! So yes, obviously shuttles, which I will be looking at, but I was also talking about other vessels and the like that a starship would carry. Of course, these vary with the type of vessel too. Craft such as the Galaxy class had 3 shuttle bays, with 2 in the main hull and 1 large one at the rear of the saucer section. Something smaller, like an Intrepid, only had a single shuttle bay, and it was a rather conservative one at that. Generally, however, a large starship would have a loadout of 4 types of small craft, not counting personal vessels or the captain's yacht. We'll start with those craft with the shortest range and single purpose, the worker bees as they are known. These can come in several varieties and have been part of Starfleet's workforce since practically its inception. These small, one-pilot vessels serve purposes from maintenance to cargo transferences, and they lack warp drive in most cases, even environmental regulation, often requiring the operator to don an EVA suit inside the cockpit. In the mid-23rd century, these small craft were equipped with manipulation arms which themselves featured numerous tools. These tools were interchangeable and adapted for various small tasks, but could include cutting lasers or plasma torches for slicing into ship hulls or cutting up debris. They were deployed to repair external damage, salvage operations, or even to ferry cargo, basically small utility craft. By the late 23rd century, around 2268, these had been phased out in favour of the Cargo Management Units, CMUs, that were in operation at starbases such as the San Francisco Fleet Yards, before expanding to see regular duty aboard ships. These served the same purpose as the early worker bees, even adopting the name, but originally had a focus on transferring large amounts of cargo via their stronger impulse engines. However, when these vessels were outfitted with manipulator arms too, it would have been apparent that they served equally well in ship maintenance and construction. By 2319, these new craft were part of every new starship's complement, and soon a regular inclusion aboard starships in general. Much like their predecessor, their arms could be removed or changed for a variety of other tools. However, for the most part, they lacked an internal atmosphere, allowing the spacesuit-clad pilot to easily enter and exit the capsule to conduct affairs with greater finesse if needed, I guess. Large ships, like the Galaxy class, often carried around 4 of these small ships for maintenance. The next craft we see are the shuttle pods. These are defined as non-warp capable that are smaller than shuttles and designed specifically for ferrying people. Usually 2 people would crew these craft, but they could hold up to 4. These included the Type 15 and the Type 18s, and were used often to travel to and from a planet's surface, starbases, or in between ships. Basically, any time warp was not required. The designation seems to have been carried over from the basic non-warp shuttle pods seen on craft like the pre-Federation NX-01 Enterprise. Moving up in scale from the shuttle pods, we have the shuttles themselves. These were the primary warp-capable subcraft of a starship and made up the majority of the capacity of a shuttle bay. Space stations and the like did maintain a supply of them, but due to their long-range nature, it was actually less common to see them in use around starbases, where shuttle pods and other specialised inspection craft did just fine. There are so many types of shuttles to warrant their own video, but generally they fit into 2 categories: big and small. Not every shuttle was warp capable, but most are, and as such designed for long-term occupants, being able to run independent missions from their mothership. Such craft featured replicators, transporters, and the full range of environmental controls. They also had offensive and defensive capabilities and a wide array of sensors. In essence, everything a starship needed to function, just on a far smaller scale, running off of a mini warp core. So, shuttles were deployed for a variety of reasons, but often as transport to and from the main ship when it was impractical or dangerous for the starship to make the journey itself. We often saw crew utilise a shuttle to visit locations where the Enterprise was unable to deviate from its course, or when transporters were not an option. Variations in mission profile of the main ship often dictated what kind of shuttles were loaded aboard. For example, there were specific medical-orientated shuttles, survey craft, and even experimental ones, and ones designed to deploy ground vehicles. Starfleet divided its shuttles into numbered classes. Smaller shuttles, such as the Class 2, often made room for a pilot and a co-pilot, and were fast, agile, and great for quick runs to and from a planet. However, they were not designed for comfort, so long-term usage was possible but unfavourable. Such cramped conditions gave rise to terms like Class 2 claustrophobia. Slightly larger are models like the Type 6s or 8s. These still had the standard seating for 2 occupants, but a much roomier interior. These vessels actually featured rather comfortable seating in the rear that could be swapped out for inventory space depending on mission requirements. A Class 6 was given to the time-displaced Captain Scott, and if I had to speculate, I think that these sorts of ships were given out when a mission was expected to take longer than a day or so. These were more numerous aboard larger starships like a Galaxy class, while smaller ships made do with smaller shuttles. See the USS Voyager, which did have a Class 8, but made more use of its numerous Class 2s. Getting larger, we have the Type 7s and 11s. These bigger shuttles were more personal-centric craft made for ferrying multiple people for whatever purpose, often termed administrative. This would likely have been for diplomatic duties. The Type 11, however, was designed to be a large, multi-mission vessel with a high degree of adaptability and manoeuvrability. These vessels saw implementation in the Sovereign-class starships and beyond, likely meaning that their design and function was influenced by the preceding Dominion and Borg threats. Even the shuttles were beefed up. Larger than shuttles is the subclass of shuttle known as the runabouts. The first of this classification was seen in the Danube-class runabouts allocated to Deep Space Nine and similar Federation outposts. But large vessels, again such as the Galaxy class, would house several within their hangars as they became more common. Space stations often had several of these in their bays, as do outposts. Being practically immobile locations, these larger shuttles were the answer to long-range travel in the area. The runabouts are basically a small starship. They not only feature all the standard systems of a shuttlecraft, but also several amenities, such as more private cabins, and mission-specific rooms that could be outfitted with small labs or tech bays. These were designed to run missions completely autonomously for weeks, maybe even months at a time, and as such had to remain comfortable for an extended stay. The downside was that they were often rather slow, but could be modified for increased speed. All of these shuttles, runabouts and worker pods were capable of operating in atmosphere, as well as the depths of space, and several could even be modified to work under greater pressures than a standard M-class. Alongside the vessels themselves, the Starfleet's shuttle bays had maintenance pits that could open up to allow the repair or modification of their inventory of small craft, and some vessels had industrial replicators that could be used to manufacture entire components to replenish their supply. While the maintenance bays or hangars were found on all vessels large enough to accommodate shuttles, the industrial replicators were less frequent, and some vessels would simply have to scrap damaged small craft, then resupply at the next opportunity. Shuttles of any size, from the small Type 15s to full runabouts, could be independently named from their mother ship. Although the Danube class were granted their own independent registry number alongside their name, smaller craft retained the registry number of the starships to which it was assigned, and were simply differentiated by a number. This marks a distinct difference in designation, where shuttles were regarded as little more than infantry, and runabouts as basically a whole starship, despite serving similar purposes. Shuttle bays on starships had various methods of storing their craft too, with some being held in bays akin to parking lots, where the floor space was not a concern, while other ships could retract them into compartments such as beneath the floor or behind walls. Many vessels would retain some empty space, however, for the arrival of visiting craft or any other needed ships that may be encountered, so a starship's capacity for shuttles was often higher than what was being utilised. Something like a Defiant class, a small vessel by itself only 170 metres, actually had a special type of compact shuttle called the Type 10, or Chaffee shuttle pod, designed for it. These were as utilitarian in design as their mothership, and were less than 10 metres long. The Defiant carried only 4, while a Galaxy-class starship carried routinely 8 shuttlecraft, 8 shuttle pods, 4 worker bees, and had room for 1, maybe several runabouts. This is unlikely to even be its full capacity, as some specs dedicate an entire deck to shuttle storage, which would allow for dozens more. Basically, a rule of thumb is that the larger the vessel, the more shuttles it's going to have, and the larger they'll be. So, there we have it, a breakdown of the standard small craft that you'd find aboard a Federation starship, and the reasons for their variety in design. While the exact loadout would vary from ship to ship and even mission to mission, these are the most common things you'd find down there. Thanks for watching this video on the subject, and I'm currently exploring topics around this sort of thing, so that's why I'm not going into specifics on the shuttle types themselves here. Thanks again. I've been Rick, and until the next video, goodbye. So, most Trek fans will have heard of Utopia Planitia, the United Federation of Planets, shipyards and dry docks around orbit of Mars, and the organisation's largest facility, and of course, many a famous vessel has launched from these docks, such as the Enterprise NCC-1701D and the original Enterprise, right? Nope. While Utopia Planitia saw the construction of the Galaxy-class Enterprise D, many other starships were in fact constructed and launched from a much older Starfleet installation. The San Francisco shipyards, including the NX-01, the original Enterprise, as well as the vessel that would go on to become the Dash A, as well as the B and the E. These shipyards are responsible too for many refit and repair projects, and are the numerous dry docks that can be seen nearby to the Earth space dock. So let's look at their part in Starfleet's production of interstellar vessels. San Francisco is home to several shipyards in real life, and the Star Trek mythology takes those locations and advances them into the future. From what I could find out, San Francisco has had a long history of ship construction, dating back to the Mare Island Naval Shipyards in 1853, which was eventually decommissioned in 1996, as well as other sites that have changed hands, such as Hunter's Point. In Star Trek, after first contact with the Vulcans, humanity began to get its acts together, and around 2130, the United Earth Starfleet was formed out of the exploratory space agencies of the world and various militaries all folding into one entity. This fledgling Starfleet was established in San Francisco, and as a result the dry docks and shipyards formerly owned by the Navy were turned over to Starfleet to continue ship construction, this time for spacefaring ships. We actually don't have an exact date for the founding of Starfleet, but since the 20th century we've been aware that the best place to build and launch spaceships would be in space. So, in orbit above Earth there were numerous lattice-like structures created to act as frames for ship construction, and these were treated as an extension of the ground-based factories, sharing the name, the San Francisco Fleet Shipyards. These installations were completed even before the formation of the United Federation of Planets in 2161, with the earliest ships recorded being the Franklin, departing from here in 2151, as well as the Warp 5 program's own flagship, the Enterprise NX-01. The planet-side shipyards tend to construct and build segments and components of the vessel, then shift them to orbit via delivery for construction. In 2161, Starfleet was transferred over to the United Federation of Planets, as well as all its assets, and an age of technological development of shared technology between the 4 founding members accelerated ship construction. Other notable vessels to have been constructed here include the USS Shenzhou and the Discovery, as well as it becoming the home for the Constitution-class project, as well as its subsequent refits. The prototype USS Constitution was completed in 2244 and launched alongside its sister ship in 2245. The project was overseen initially by Admiral William Jeffreys and Captain Robert April, and was one of the first projects that a newly graduated Montgomery Scott was assigned to. At this time, Utopia Planitia did exist, but it was hardly the Goliath of a facility that it would become, and construction of the Earth space dock was still ongoing too, so the San Francisco Fleet Yard was the primary construction point of an early Starfleet. There were other outposts, such as the 40 Eridani A construction yards, being Vulcan's contemporary, and Tella and Andoria both having their own versions too. By the mid-23rd century, around the era of the initial Klingon War, the fleet yards were the most prestigious in the Federation, being so close to Starfleet's base of operations, and their design has not really evolved since. The structures in orbit are simply dry docks, a frame that can accommodate a starship and come in various sizes. The purpose is to allow easy access to all points of the vessel, and various Worker B craft and extravehicular activities are conducted under their shelter. The biggest benefit to this design is threefold as far as I can tell. 1. The lattice would probably allow for the recovery of debris or junk that might accidentally be jettisoned from construction or repair work, and I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there were tractor beams installed for just those scenarios, as well as holding a ship in place. 2. There are numerous bright lamps around the dry dock that illuminate all sides of the vessel. Shadows in space get dark after all. And 3. Psychologically, I imagine it's some placebo of comfort for the workers that have to go EVA. In 2270, the most major Constitution refit was undertaken, and many of the repairs were conducted at this facility across all of its line, including the Enterprise and the USS Yorktown, which would go on to be renamed the Enterprise A. At this time, the Earth space dock had been completed and joined the fleet yards in orbit, although the ESD does feature impulse engines and could independently move. Its spacious dome could also accommodate several starships, but it was not considered a part of the San Francisco Fleet Yards. But elements of the Excelsior class were designed at both ESD and the San Francisco dry docks. In 2293, the USS Enterprise B was commissioned and launched from here, after the Excelsior class was worked on in part modification. By the year 2330, however, the prestigious shipyards had been joined in orbit by other stations, and McKinley Station was the site of the Ambassador-class Enterprise C's launch. A couple of decades after that, and Utopia Planitia had usurped the San Francisco Fleet Yards as the Sol system's largest facility, and the Federation began to shift its resource allocation to the Red Planet for ship construction. The latest contribution the SF Drydocks made to the fleet, however, would be its involvement in the Sovereign-class line of starships, with the construction and launch of the USS Enterprise NCC-1701E, a homecoming of the flagship name to its original construction yards. Although overshadowed by later installations such as Utopia Planitia, the San Francisco Fleet Yard's contribution to Starfleet cannot be understated, and although it has been joined over time by many other orbital facilities, not to mention other member worlds' contributions, it stands out as the oldest of Starfleet's installations. Now that Utopia Planitia has been canonically destroyed, it seems that this old yard is gonna have to pick up the slack. So, thanks for watching this lore video on the San Francisco dry docks and fleet yards of Starfleet. We hear a lot about the grandly named Utopia Planitia, but not so much on the other orbital facilities, so I thought I'd shed some light on them. Thanks again for watching. I've been Rick, so long and farewell. In 2311, Starfleet tied its own hands when it signed the Treaty of Alderaan with the Romulan Star Empire. This led to a ban on Federation worlds developing cloaking technology in order to uphold a with Romulus and prevent another Romulan war after the incendiary Tomed incident. But before this, cloaking technology was known to Starfleet and had been the subject of much study. Rick here with a quick video looking into the history of cloaking devices within Starfleet. There will be spoilers ahead for Star Trek Discovery Season 3 and other series, so be warned. As far back as 2151, the NX-01 Enterprise had encountered the Suliban Cabal, a sect of Suliban who had been provided with technology from the future, specifically cloaking devices. These were hampered by the tech of the time and could be countered with a quantum beacon that was provided by a future Federation faction seeking to balance the discrepancy. Not long after, barely a year into its exploration of deep space, the NX-01 ran afoul of a Romulan cloaked minefield, followed by several Tavaro warbirds. At this time, cloaking tech was known as a cloak screen, and still in its infancy, although the Romulans were ahead of the curve when it came to its application. During the Earth-Romulan War of 2155 to 2161, the Star Empire seldom deployed their cloaking devices on missions, probably because Starfleet had retained its knowledge of the quantum beacon. Nice job on the temporal prum directive there, guys. Instead, the Romulans often resorted to simpler methods of hiding, such as lowering power emissions and coasting into enemy space or hiding in sensor interference. Because few Romulan vessels were captured, and those that were seemed to not even have cloaking devices installed, Starfleet research and development had little to go on when it came to creating their own. This problem persisted into the 23rd century, when Starfleet came into conflict with the Klingons. As of 2254, the Klingon Empire had obtained cloaking devices from somewhere. The Apocrypha states it was discovered on board the ancient sarcophagus vessel and restored, but who knows where ancient Klingons got it? Maybe they pillaged it? Point is, for the second time, Starfleet was facing a foe that had a superior method of stealth to their ships. The Starfleet had been experimenting with its own cloaking theories, but had hit a roadblock caused by a lack of power. Section 31 in the meantime, although hoarding much experimental gear and things that would eventually find their way into regular circulation, surprisingly was no better off on this front. They operated on several ships, the NCIA-93s, that were designed from the ground up to evade sensor scans when in a low-power dark mode. But this was effectively just a superior form of power dampening that any vessel can do. I assume Starfleet eventually found a way to counter early cloaks, as by 2266 the Romulans were back at it again with a new cloaking device that the Enterprise 1701 had a lot of trouble with. This device, however, was still not immune to Starfleet's sensors, and the Enterprise was able to vaguely shadow the bird of prey and eventually destroy it. In 2268, Starfleet had had enough of being behind on this front, dispatched Kirk and crew to procure a device, a new model that seemed to have rectified even the minor vulnerability from 2 years prior. This device was captured and returned to Starfleet for study. Over the next couple of years, the Klingon Empire would go on to create more cloaking devices, and some suspect that they are also of Romulan origin. Eventually, Starfleet's first-hand research into the cloak led to a number of vulnerabilities to be uncovered, methods for tracking a cloaked ship. But as always with an arms race, as an exploit is found, it's addressed, and a newer cloak is rolled out. Eventually, however, the Treaty of Alderaan was signed, which halted all development on the device. Starfleet would, however, continue to develop its own varieties of stealth technology, based on forms of invisibility that weren't affiliated with the Romulan cloaking system. However, the most notable violation of the treaty was uncovered in 2370 by Captain Picard and Commander Riker. The USS Pegasus, under the command of then Captain Pressman, had developed its own experimental phase cloak 12 years earlier. The project was cancelled when the ship was wrecked, but it was still in direct opposition to the tenuous peace between the UFP and the Star Empire. However, the Star Empire had little time to dwell on this, as the Dominion War erupted, and they allocated a Romulan-operated cloaking device to the USS Defiant in favour for all the intel Starfleet had on the Dominion. The device was only to be operated by a Romulan officer, who went on to become one of the most prominent members of the... Wait. Tyrell vanished inexplicably? Ah. The Bajoran wormhole was also mined with cloaked self-replicating mines. Presumably the Federation had mutual permission to do that too. What Starfleet probably didn't have permission for was the cloaking device aboard the secret holodeck ship of 2375. Although their observation posts were hidden with holographic overlays, the holoship downright had a cloaking device. So, clearly, by this time, Starfleet had learned how to make their own cloaking tech, but refrained from using it on their ships to maintain the spirit of the treaty. However, in 2387, the Romulan supernova occurred and wiped out Romulus, Remus and several other Star Empire worlds. What happens after then is still being written, but it is known that eventually the unification of Romulus and Vulcan resulted in the founding of Ni'Var, the renaming of Vulcan to the dual home of Vulcans and Romulans. As Vulcan was a UFP member world, this would have meant that the Romulans, no longer under the banner of the Star Empire, would also have allied with the Federation. As such, a continued ban of cloaking tech would have been unnecessary, so the Treaty of Alderaan was annulled. Again, it's not established when exactly this joining happened, but in beta canon, Romulus joined Starfleet around the 26th century. What is certain is that the Federation's starships had cloaking devices on them by the 32nd century. Starfleet has so often been on the back foot when it comes to cloaking tech, with the most pioneering research into them being how to overcome them, nullify the advantage rather than catch up. If you look at it this way, I can see why the Federation didn't consider the Treaty of Alderaan a bad deal. Every cloak they had encountered so far was eventually countered, and their own stealth tech was nothing to snip at either. However, the instances where a cloaked enemy got ahead of them often did result in major incidents, so maybe they would have benefited from first-hand experience. Thanks for watching this summary of the Federation's history with cloaking devices. What do you think of the treaty? A fair deal for 88 years of practical peace with the Star Empire? I've been Rick. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Or not, because cloaking. Goodbye. Hi, Rick here again. Deep Space Nine, or Tarak Nor, has been in the Bajor system for its entire life, but it's changed hands numerous times. For the majority of its time, it was in the hands of the Cardassian Union, but passes out of their control. So this video is to look at the history of the station that bore host to some of the greatest quadrant-shaping events in Star Trek lore. This video will contain occasional apocryphal content, but nothing too wild, like the station being blown up in the 2380s and rebuilt with an identical one. The station itself is a Nor-class base, designed by the Cardassian Khotan Darak and the coercion of the Bajoran architect Chana San. Dubbed Tarak Nor, the several other stations of this design were made by the Cardassians in other areas of their territory, such as Empok Nor. The occupation of Bajor was a move on part of the Cardassian Union to expand and conquer other planets to force them into servitude to their might. Such goals had brought them into conflict with entities such as the United Federation of Planets before in the past, but the UFP's dealing with much of Cardassia had been reactionary. Tarak Nor was constructed to further this agenda. Bajor itself was rich in agricultural and mineral wealth, so as the Cardassians conquered it, they instilled a Bajoran occupational government which they could control in order to export that wealth through slavery. From 2346 to 2351, the orbital station was constructed over Bajor. When completed, its function was to refine iridium ore, which was mined on Bajor in labour camps before being brought to the station. From there, it was loaded onto Cardassian vessels, which took the haul deep back into their territory to make new vessels and structures. The Bajoran slaves who built Tarak Nor were then sentenced to death, to keep plans for the station from being passed on, but this was foiled by the Bajoran resistance. Command of the station was transferred over to Gul Dukat, and under his rule, he appointed a non-Bajoran security chief in Constable Odo, and actively encouraged non-Bajoran businesses to open on the promenade, the inner ring of the station below the command levels. This was for the comfort and provision of his forces, although he'd probably twist it to seem more benevolent. At its peak, refineries could churn out over 20,000 tons of iridium a day on the labour of over 7,000 Bajoran slaves. The station also served as the seat of the prefect, the Cardassian official who oversaw the occupation of Bajor. Being an incredibly military-minded state society, the position of Gul, akin to a captain in rank, also came with numerous political obligations, such as managing the occupation. The Cardassian conquest-focused rule in the end would cut them too. With many of their goods being brought in from captured territories, Cardassia weakened its own agriculture and production in the long run, meaning it needed others to exploit, spiralling the military state further. Anyway, eventually the Cardassians withdrew from Bajor for an unknown reason. There are some that say that the Bajoran resistance emerged victorious, while most Cardassians simply say it was a political decision to let go of a system they no longer had use for. This withdrawal extended to Terak Nor, but before they left, the Cardassians were ordered to trash the station. They salvaged everything that might be of value, broke what was left, and even killed several of the supposedly non-affiliated shop owners on the promenade. In 2369, after the withdrawal of the Cardassians, Bajor dissolved its occupational government and reconstituted it into the provisional government, styling itself a republic. Sorely aware of the state of the ravaged planet, and with many of its resources spent, or raised as part of the withdrawal order, the government made the decision to reach out to the Federation of Planets, not only in a request for support, but as consideration as a member world. After all, Bajor now had a unified planetary government, no societal segregation or caste-inducing laws, and had technically been a warp-capable species for longer than even humans. This was a conscientious choice in of itself. The Federation had publicly refused to help Bajor directly, as it would violate the Prime Directive. Moral or not, technically it would have, as the Bajoran occupational government still existed, technically was the primary political power of Bajor, and had made no such requests for aid. But I would point out that the Federation was at war with Cardassia at the time too, the Border Wars, and many point to this as a factor in the Cardassians' retreat. Now free, Bajor created their own militia, so-called, as it recruited from the civilian populace, and many of the former freedom fighters joined up, their work in taking back the planet done, now looking to rebuild. In the same vein of reclaiming their planet, Bajor took ownership of the abandoned Terak Nor, with an eye to utilise its facilities for their own benefit, only to find the place a complete wreck. It was in short order that the provisional government then came to an agreement with the Federation that they could run their operations in helping to rebuild Bajor from Terak Nor, but the station would remain under Bajoran sovereignty. As such, it would support crews of both Bajoran militia and Starfleet personnel, but the ultimate running of the station would be managed by Starfleet. What to do with the station, however, was Bajor's decision, and they appointed Major Kieran Reese to oversee those interests, serving as the station's executive officer. Starfleet, in the meantime, sent Commander Benjamin Sisko to help rebuild and prep Bajor for UFP membership, should they continue this route. The UFP even sent the Enterprise D as a show of the importance with which they regarded this endeavour. As a Federation-run station, it was termed Deep Space Nine, and would be run like a Federation starbase. This too rubbed some shoulders the wrong way on Bajor, as they felt like the Federation would impose its own rules over Bajor and threaten the independence they had worked so hard to achieve. Nevertheless, the governments agreed and reconstruction of the station began, while similar agricultural and infrastructure projects were conducted on Bajor itself. It helped that Bajor was on the track to Federation membership, as it enabled a freer exchange of technology and the like than with planets completely outside of the UFP's jurisdiction. even if help had been requested. Might be a bit cynical to look at it this way, but in effect, the Federation was making an investment in a prosperous future Bajor. Exactly what the Bajorans had planned for the station we'll never know for sure, because soon after the Federation administration was completed, it was relocated to the Denorius Belt to guard the newly discovered wormhole that orbited the bridge to the Gamma Quadrant at only 1,000 kilometers away. This order, notably, was given not by Starfleet, but by the Bajoran militia exo Major Kira. Again, Starfleet runs the station, but Bajor decides what to do with it. This new discovery changed how DS9 was viewed overnight, and the importance of the Bajor system exploded. Now, instead of reopening the refineries, the station became a centre of trade and commerce to a new unexplored region of space. The shops of the promenade were being encouraged to remain even before the discovery of the wormhole, but now the Bajor system suddenly was the place to be, a new frontier. Bajor suddenly was managing requests and trade from several other species, all looking to utilise the wormhole, and the UFP was at the head of the queue. This would have gone a long way in aiding the rebuilding of Bajor. Starfleet would continue to manage exploration and the policing of the wormhole from Deep Space Nine, but was mindful of the fact that the phenomena was also a Bajoran site of cultural significance, their celestial temple, as well as being in their space. The balance between the UFP and Bajor was not always smooth. There were often arguments about access to the temple, and Sisko's appointment as reluctant emissary to the Prophets served to both aid and hinder the efforts. Overall, the Federation would protect Bajor and its interests in return for priority access to the Gamma Quadrant, but also was aware that it needed to allow others access too in order to encourage the growth of Bajor. With brewing turmoil with the Dominion, Starfleet saw fit to drastically upgrade the station, converting it from the site of trade into a strategic compound too. What qualms Bajor may have had about this were quashed with the decisions to halt its Federation membership application and sign a non-aggression pact with the Dominion. This politically distanced the recovering Bajor from the Federation and saved the planet much more grief, an act that ultimately would affirm the notion that Starfleet, unlike the Cardassians before, prized Bajor as a world, not a resource. The order was given to untangle the Federation presence on the station from Bajor, and Starfleet was formally asked by Bajor's representative Kira to leave. Side note, I love that scene, and the episode is a call to arms if you're interested. Starfleet installed much equipment on the station, which would continue to remain their property, although Bajoran personnel were trained in its operation, including numerous auxiliary craft in the form of runabouts, and eventually the USS Defiant. This is also why Bajoran security on the station still only used Bajoran phasers and the like. This equipment was notably destroyed when the Federation had to abandon the station to the Dominion. When the order was given by Kira to sabotage the station itself, it was not only to spite the Dominion, but maintain the Prime Directive. The Dominion effectively then instills its presence on the station, taking up the position the Federation once had, in that Deep Space Nine, or Tarak Nor as it was renamed, was still a Bajoran station, ceded to them 5 years earlier by the Cardassians. However, as the Cardassians were now part of the Dominion's partnership, in practice, Gul Dukat had regained control of the space station. This second rule was not as dire as the Cardassians' occupation, however, as Cardassia was restrained by the Dominion's non-aggression pact, and so could not re-engage in its monstrous actions as before without violating the Dominion's policies, and the Dominion was far more powerful than Cardassia. When Starfleet retook the station in Operation Return, Bajor clandestinely supported this decision but remained technically neutral until the end of the Dominion War and the signing of the Treaty of Bajor. At the end of it all, Bajor's petition to join the Federation continued, despite the pause, but throughout the entire show, the station remained property of the Bajorans. As for what happens when Bajor joins the Federation in full, most starbases constructed by Starfleet are their creations, but Deep Space Nine is a special case. It would, in all likelihood, remain outside of Federation property, but still be as a Federation station. Basically, I think in order to maintain the level of commerce that flows through DS9, the status quo, as of last time we saw it, would generally be maintained. So, thanks for following me into this look back over the history of the Bajoran Station Deep Space Nine. I've always liked how it was this place of grimness and harshness, which is reflected in its spiky design, but its heart was kind of redeemed. Purified? Ultimately, it was built to do great harm to Bajor, but ended up supplying much in the way of its salvation. Thanks again for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Can I help you? Hi, can I help you?
This is exactly what I expected to happen. Did he really think there was going to be any other outcome? Not that I'm condoning it, but anyway, let's get into it. Skip, dip, did a flip. Skip it a button, da Alright everyone, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and also hit the bell to get notifications of all my newest uploads. Thank you very much. So, review EDP 445 USA. I've made a few videos on this man because the story fascinates me. If you are not interested, you simply have to do one thing. Not watch these videos. That's it. That's all you gotta do. It's real simple. Just click off. When I talk about a tech news story again, you can click on that one. Don't be afraid to use your nails, boys! So anyway, jokes aside. EDP 445, we know what happened. He was caught by a group called the Poachers, who ended up being, how can I put this nicely, not very nice people themselves. And what he was caught doing, EDP, was trying to hook up with a 13-year-old girl. And this isn't the first time it happened. This is the first time he was, like, caught red-handed in person in a super diet soda Chris Hansen sting operation. But nonetheless, he admitted to it. He admitted it was him in the chat. He admitted he knew that he thought the girl who ended up being a decoy was 13. That's all that matters. I understand in the court of law because of how absolutely piss poor the Poachers handled the situation that he may never see behind bars ever or never see a jail cell ever. But nonetheless, the guy admitted to it. Okay, you guys know him against cancel culture. But if you admit to doing it, and it's irrefutable because out of, yeah, I did all that, you're canceled, especially for what he did. Like, you're perma-canceled. That's it. It's over. Your online persona is done. Your online career is done. Quite frankly, it's going to be tough for you to live a normal life, let alone trying to be a personality on the internet. YouTube has terminated his account. His Twitter account is gone. His Facebook account is gone. And he's trying to make his own website, which we know how that's going to end. And unfortunately, as much as I don't condone any of this stuff, the vigilantism I'm not condoning in any way, shape, or form. I condemn it wholeheartedly. Let law enforcement do it. Look, the guy's already been outed, and his career and reputation is ruined. You got him. And I'm not saying it's not deservedly so, but now, just as I predicted, people are going to go to the next level because people are insane, and especially when you're caught doing something like this, you're never off of anybody's radar, ever. Well, anyway, I'm not going to show the video, but on Vimeo, next thing he's going to be on Daily Motion, but on Vimeo, EDP445 put up a video saying he's filing a restraining order. And these are some of the things that he said in the video. Well, first off, he says that he's pretty sure he knows who the person is who's bothering him and doing all these things, so that's how I assume he was able to file the restraining order, because you can't really file it against a person who you don't know who they are. This is where, look, what EDP445 did is absolutely horrendous, and he's a monstrous person, but people are going to his home. For your own, look, first off, don't go to a YouTuber's home. I don't care what they did. Again, let law enforcement handle it. But this guy has a lot of guns. I know you despise him for what he did, but do not trespass. You could end up getting yourself killed. Literally, I'm not even being sarcastic, or I'm not trying to be funny at all right now. The guy owns firearms. Obviously, he's not mentally stable. And on top of it, he's paranoid. Like, you're begging to get shot if you go to his home. Do not do it. I'm not even trying to be funny right now. I'm not over-exaggerating anything. Stay the hell away from his home. You're asking for or begging for a bullet. He says this person's also talking about him on Reddit and Discord, probably trying to organize things to get people to go to his home, to get people to do things like that. And this is where I totally don't agree, okay? EDP445 was the person that did all this. He is the person that put himself in this situation. He is the person that deserves the ire from the community or from the public. But now people are going after, which I knew this was going to happen too, because it's happened to me as well, and I didn't do something heinous like this at all. They're going after his family and friends. And why? They're not the ones who did this. They're not the ones who attempted to meet a 13-year-old. Okay, they're his family and they're his friends, but you know, I could have had a friend that was a bank robber. Like, does that mean I helped him rob the bank? He decided to do it. I'm not saying I have a friend who's a bank robber, but if I did, does that mean that people should be coming to my house when I knew nothing about it, when he told me absolutely nothing about him robbing the bank and hating me for the fact that he robbed the bank? No. No, like, what do you want them to do? What do you want his family and friends to, like, put him in a cage? Leave them alone. They're innocent. They're not him. If you don't like EDP, I understand. But let law enforcement handle it. He's already had his reputation ruined. Leave his family out of it, and for your own safety and for the fact that it's still his property, don't go to his home. It's just a recipe for disaster. Well, anyway, EDP then shows the restraining order that he filed, and he's showing over the checklist, like, did the person do this to you? Are they threatening your personal safety? And blah. And yeah, he's like, hell yeah, they check off all these things, except he says it in a more EDP way than that. And yeah, he deserves, like I said, the ire that's going towards him, but it's not up for the community to be vigilantes. It's not up to the community to hurt this guy. It's not up to the community to stalk this guy. I knew it was going to happen, and I think unfortunately it's unavoidable, but I condemn it wholeheartedly. This is dangerous. People are playing a dangerous game right now. This man is mentally unstable, and we know he has firearms, and if people to his home, I just don't see this ending well. But EDP, what did you expect to happen, man? Do you think this is ever going to stop, at least for the foreseeable future? I'm talking years. I don't mean foreseeable future like a few months. People are never going to forget this. Ever. Look at like the TCAP community, EDP. Those guys are all notorious and legendary in a bad way. That's the only word I could like. They're people love to hate them. 15 years after, like, there's a channel called Saul on YouTube, and these are old videos of when Chris Hansen was still with MSNBC doing To Catch a Predator. And they're as soon as a new one goes up, hundreds of thousands of people are watching. Like, say they take an old episode and upload it on Saul's channel, hundreds of thousands of people are watching. Nobody is ever going to forgive you for this or forget about it. It's not like just some typical YouTube drama that blows over, or you slipped and said something dumb on a stream. No, you got caught doing the most heinous thing ever that you could do, and no one's ever going to forgive you for it. Again, I condemn people going to his home, trying to do this vigilante crap, but did we see any other outcome? And EDP, like I've said before, what do you think is going to happen to your website, dude? I know you're still promoting it. I saw even in that video you had EDP website coming soon. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that website is just going to go, I think it's going to fail anyway with no kind of drama with it, but do you think it's going to go swimmingly? Do you think people are not going to DDoS your website, take it down, do things to it? You know, like every time you do an upload, it's just the website's going to be shut down, or people aren't going to make a bunch of fake accounts and spam crap on there. What do you think is going to happen, bro? I've never seen anything like this in my entire time doing YouTube. That's why I'm talking about it so much, not just because of viewership. I've just, this is unique in its terribleness, because not only was this guy caught and admitted to doing something absolutely horrific, or attempting to do absolutely something horrific, he's unapologetic about it, and he's still, in a way, trying to make it like nothing happened. Obviously, he's addressing things that are happening in this video, but I don't know. It's going to be crazy to see where this ends up, but I see nothing but disaster in the horizon, and I have a feeling the next couple videos I end up making on this will probably not be for a while, because it's going to take a while for things to boil up. But when I do have things to report on this, I don't see a good outcome. This is Rich of Review Tech USA signing out. Have a good one.
Hey, if you enjoy my content, consider becoming a Review Tech USA member. I'll have a link below in the description. I live stream now on this channel all the time, and it gives you access to cool emoticons to use as well while I live stream. Again, link
Oh wow.
Like that's like.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, bro.
Oh yes.
Tấn rồi. Đấy. Nhiều kia. Đấy, hao đi. Đó, phá sự việc.
Space is dangerous. It's full of strange phenomena and aliens that can cause harm to a Starfleet ship and its crew. Not all the time. In fact, day-to-day life aboard a starship was fairly dull, and these encounters were often as wondrous as they were intimidating, but nonetheless, risk was part of the business. This was a lesson learned early in Starfleet's lifetime, and soon a series of ship-wide alerts were made standard procedure for vessels. Hi, Rick here, and this lore nugget of a video looks to explain these alerts' status. Back in 2152, Starfleet's first deep space Enterprise NX-01 often encountered hazardous situations. It wasn't long before the Chief of Security and Tactical Armory Officer, Lieutenant Malcolm Reed, began testing drills to measure the crew's response time to potential dangers. Admittedly, he was a bit too engrossed in the concept at the time, as strange things were happening to the rest of the crew, but that's besides the point. The drill was eventually scaled back into a more manageable level and was termed the Tactical Alert, over other suggestions including a Reed Alert. On execution of a tactical alert, a ship-wide notification was sounded, which meant that all crew were to report to battle and emergency stations post-haste. This alert was more than a simple order to ready yourself for action, however, as it incorporated a number of ship functions that were triggered automatically. The hull plating of the NX-01 was polarized, and power supplied to the phase cannons and torpedo launchers. Security was also tightened around critical systems, which I imagine included the activation of computer firewalls. This was a Starship version of a fight-or-flight response, and this command was adopted into Starfleet operating procedures for every future Starfleet ship. Over time, it evolved into a more layered series of alerts, as not every hazard that required an immediate response also needed a full conversion to a battle stance. This new alert system was colour-coded to indicate the level of emergency. So let's begin with the two most seen ones. Yellow Alert designated a ready stance for the ship as it channeled power into the defensive systems like the shields. This status by itself presented no overtly hostile actions, therefore no call to battle stations was given and the weapons system remained unchanged. This status was often called for when the crew encountered a potentially dangerous phenomena, or could be initiated when the senior staff suspected dubious or hostile intent from an alien vessel, but nothing had been confirmed. After all, it is not standard Starfleet procedure to open fire first. Usually, Yellow Alert was marked by a changing of the computer interface displays, called LCARs, to an amber hue. Crew members under a Yellow Alert were expected to perform their duties as normal, but be ready to drop everything and report to ready stations. Yellow Alert could also be issued by the Admiralty, to ships or even fleet-wide, in preparation for a perceived offensive. This system could be escalated easily to Red Alert, which was more akin to the older tactical alerts. This prepared the ship for combat, and non-essential systems were reduced to minimal power, such as lighting and holodecks, in order to free up available resources for critical systems. LCAR's displays were changed to a red hue, and the familiar alarm sounded to alert the crew, making it very hard to miss. In this state, the weapons systems were primed, and all personnel were to drop whatever they were doing and report to stations, securing the ship for possible combat. Escalating from a Yellow Alert to a Red Alert was a quicker transition than initiating an unexpected Red Alert, as the crew and ship systems were prepared beforehand. However, the situation dictated the overall readiness. It seems that part of a Red Alert status prepared the way for succinct damage and injury reports from all over the vessel, and engineering, security and medical teams were ready to respond to locations around the ship that needed it. There was also a double Red Alert that was used in the 23rd century. This seemed to indicate a higher urgency to report to stations, likely at double time. This was not used beyond this time, however, and if I had to speculate, I'd say that it was abandoned as it kind of psychologically lessened the urgency of a Red Alert. And it sounds a bit silly. Blue Alert was a seldom used alert status that forewarned the crew of hazardous situations, such as a planetary landing or source of separation. This was often reserved for irregular starship maneuvers or operations that often required clarification on the part of the crew to report to the correct stations. The USS Defiant was expected to adopt Blue Alert on cloaking, or an Intrepid class attempting a planetary landing. Other examples included when a vessel was docking to a space frame structure like a shipyard or the Earth space dock. The Crossfield class of starship, a purely scientific vessel, was expected to undertake all sorts of strange and potentially dangerous experiments, and therefore was issued with a Black Alert to alert the crew that an experimental project was running and that it would have ship-wide effects. The USS Discovery used this in preparation for use of the Spore Hub drive. Some of these alerts are automated or tied to other systems, such as the self-destruct triggering a Red Alert, or the multi-vector assault mode triggering a Blue Alert, but all are at the discretion of the commanding officer and can be initiated or cancelled and have certain elements of the conditions altered or amended, but in essence are time savers in situations where time may be a critical factor. So there we have it, the use and function of Starfleet's colour-coded alert system and its origin. There are many more operating protocols that crews must respond to, but these are the big ones that we see the most. So, thanks for watching, and again, goodbye. The United Federation of Planets, by extension Starfleet, uses a classification system to identify different planets and their environments. This is a far simpler system than the real-life counterpart that we use today that takes into account a planet's mass, orbit, composition, and even the star it orbits, if any. The use of the simple letters attributed to a planetary object is probably derived from the star classification system, where O, B, A, F, G, K and M indicate the colour of the star. That's a simplification, and I'm sure astronomy buffs out there can explain it a lot better. In-universe though, the system adopted by Starfleet was in fact one created by the Vulcans, which makes sense, as in the early days of exploration, many of the star charts that Starfleet used were given to them by the Vulcan High Command. There are a few confirmed classifications that we find throughout the shows, and a myriad of others that come from materials such as books, including star chart atlases. But we'll begin with the confirmed classifications. Also, if I refer to human life, I generally mean oxygen, nitrogen, humanoid species from Trek. It's just quicker to say. So, let's play the alphabet game, but Star Trek style. And already I'm failing at the alphabet, because I'm starting with M. An M-class world, short for the Vulcan term Minshara, makes up a very small percentage of the universe, but are the most visited in the series. This is because an M-class world is any planet that can support oxygen, nitrogen breathing life, which included surface water and required very little adaptation to survive on the surface. Earth is obviously an M-class world, as is Vulcan. Despite the heat, which humans would find uncomfortable, a human beaming down to Vulcan would require no breathing apparatus, nor environmental suit. There was a subcategory of classifications for the M-class, 1 through to 4, but all were considered habitable and prime real estate for colonisation. Next to this we have the Class L. Class L planets are also habitable by most humanoid life, but have some feature that prevents them from being easily colonisable, such as a thinner atmosphere. These planets are very close to the M-class, and with a little terraforming could easily support humans and others. Of course, they may have their own life forms already, so terraforming a planet might not be a great idea. An example of a Class L is the planets that featured in the DS9 episode The Ascent that Odo and Quark crash land on. It had vegetation, but none of it was edible, and it didn't have any fauna, therefore the environment by itself could not support human life. A Class K was a planet that required atmospheric domes for human habitation, so we're talking about a solid surface and tolerable gravity, but usually the atmosphere, temperature or other factors would kill if not for the protection. Colonies on this type of world are still not uncommon, but usually completely reliant on outside deliveries. A Class J planet is a gas giant akin to our own Jupiter. These planets are not suitable for colonisation as there is no surface to settle. Maybe some strange life has adapted to them somehow, but with atmospheric pressure and the like, we'll probably never know. There is also a subgroup of at least 9 variations which may refer to the atmospheric composition, because there is also a Class T planet, which is also a gas giant but seems to be one of a super size called Ultra Giant. The Voyager episode Good Shepherd featured a Class T. Class N planets are back to being solid ground, but are uninhabitable for humans, requiring a lot of adaptation and technology to support human life. It is worth noting though that Class N planets can be inhabited by a species that do not have the same atmospheric requirements as a human. Inhabitants from a Class N world, however, usually cannot mingle with Class M dwellers, even wearing breathing gear, as their atmospheric requirements are too severe. Venus is regarded as a Class N planet in apocryphal material. Class H was a classification of planets that is considered uninhabitable for human life due to intense radiation, even if it has oxygen in its atmosphere and water. Tau Cygni 5 has an oxygen-argon atmosphere, breathable by humans, but it was the intense hyperonic radiation that made it unlikely as a colony world. Despite this, however, some stranded individuals were able to eventually thrive there after becoming immune to the radiation. A Class D planet is a planet or planetoid of rock that is incapable of supporting human life due to a lack of atmosphere. You can see a Class D object quite clearly from Earth. Luna, our own moon, is considered a Class D planetoid. Due to their nature, they can be colonised, but terraforming is highly unlikely, instead requiring pressure domes to survive and usually artificial gravity to make up for the smaller mass of the objects. Though there has been the odd rule breaker that had an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. Class Y planets are colloquially known as Demon Class due to their hellish environment. Such planets have solid ground, but atmospheres that could burn, asphyxiate and poison all at once. These planets were even damaging to most technology and starships, and best avoided unless absolutely necessary. A Class Y planet was encountered and landed on by the USS Voyager in the episode Demon. Any life encountered here is going to be unlike anything humanoid. Type R is a terrestrial planet. Usually these planets are uninhabitable, but now we're moving into the unconfirmed territory. The Class R could apply to a rogue planet, and due to the fact that they orbit no star for warmth or energy, they are usually barren of life. However, several inhabited versions have been discovered, such as Dakala and perhaps the Founder's homeworld, though both of these planets can support human life, Dakala due to the geological activity, providing the atmosphere and warmth, and the Founder's world may be terraformed by the Great Link. The rest of these classifications have yet to be identified on screen. Class A are young geothermally active planets that are mostly molten. B is a barren world heated by very close proximity to a star, such as Mercury. Class C is a dead, rocky world. No heat, no life, and usually was once a different classification. E is a molten world too hot to support life, and a Class F is also molten but could sustain a habitat with effort. A Class G planet is one that has cooled to create a crystalline surface in places. Class I is a gas supergiant. O is reserved for Class M planets that have a high level of surface water, over 80%, so Earth would be close to this designation. Class P is a frozen world with a habitable atmosphere but generally survivable conditions provided care is taken and exposure minimal. Andoria would be considered such a planet as the surface would not kill you due to its composition, just its frigid temperature. Class Q planets are best surmised with a bit of everything. These planets are generally presented as habitable, but are subject to extreme fluctuations that are extreme enough to change the classification of the planet. The Genesis planet would be one such short-lived example, and the Class S is another type of gaseous ultragiant. So there we have it. These are the known and speculated classifications of planetary bodies in Star Trek. I wonder what classifications U, V, W, X and Z are for. Then again, they might well not exist. I mean, what are the odds that there are as many planet types as there are letters in the English alphabet? Wait, for that matter, wasn't this based on a Vulcan directory? How many letters do they have? Whatever. Thanks for watching this video, and if you had to make up a type for a Class X planet, what would it be? I'm going to go with a planet that looks like a giant... Necessity is the mother of creation. Technology is the product of a civilization to accelerate development and increase efficiency. But when that drive overtakes the culture it is there to serve, what then? The culture becomes slaves to progress, to technology, as biology itself is bent to the designs of artificial evolution. Hello all, welcome to a veritably villainous version of the Index. I'm Rick, and today we're going to be inspecting the Borg Collective. The Borg themselves are a network of biological units modified by technology which they spread throughout the galaxy with the goal of assimilating all species within that will add to their growth. They are chasing the ultimate goal of perfection, a concept without end, and as such will never be satisfied. The origin of the species is surrounded by rumour and speculation, with even the Borg themselves unaware of their true origins, with memories going back at least 900 years and probably earlier, but their data on that time is fragmentary, perhaps reflecting the state of the Borg at this time. They may have been a species that developed a neural network, then through cyborgification became early versions of the Borg, perhaps to gain immortality of a sort through preservation of memories, or perhaps even a nanotech virus that ran amok. The answers simply elude us. Other sources speculate that the entity known as Vija created the Borg in its quest to find its creators, to absorb their knowledge, and then used those modified beings for maintenance for Vija's growing mass. The problem with this is that it means that the Voyager space probe would have to have ended up back in time. As of 900 years ago, the Borg had already begun to expand as a species in the Delta Quadrant, assimilating others into their hive mind. Powers of the time, such as the Trai and the Vardois, knew of the race, but were too occupied with their own wars to consider the fiendish species a true threat. But over the course of the next centuries, relentless efforts on the Borg's part led to an explosion of absorbed planets and a destruction of rival powers. The Borg Collective has a near complete lack of an actual culture, with all forms of individuality snuffed out as a threat to the unity that the Collective requires to function. Their development over time was exponential, and war with them increasingly futile, as when an individual is assimilated, the opponent loses a soldier, and the Borg gain one. But the true threat is that when assimilated, an individual's entire experience is uploaded to the Borg's neural collective network, and all data that person had is now available to every Borg unit. They may suffer from a cultural stagnation, but this form of expansion allows them to develop and learn new technologies. The Borg are methodical in their targets, assigning every encountered race a numerical value rather than its name. They will often ignore ambient individuals, only assimilating them if they get too close for comfort, or if the effort expended to assimilate is negligible. Although they do seem to place a higher priority on larger populaces, such as entire vessels, again the cost of engagement is weighed against the potential gain for the Collective. When the Borg first encounter a new species, they begin to methodically dissect them, literally and figuratively, cutting away parts of their technology to analyse, abducting members to assimilate their knowledge, and then disposing of the rest. If a species is found to possess knowledge or technology that can be useful to the Collective, that race becomes a priority target, and a Borg cube is dispatched to begin assimilation of their home systems, striking at the centre, then expanding outwards, consuming all in its path, destroying that which resists. Many species have been scattered by the Borg, their home systems lost. Individuals are assimilated when Borg nanites are introduced into the body. They then begin repurposing cells to generate more of these nanomachines that then spread like a virus in a matter of minutes. This spread can actually be seen as the flow of black nanite-laden blood spreads, draining pigmentation. Once in sufficient quantities, these machines begin to generate ports for implants and convert bodily organs into cyborg-like replacements, including the rewiring of brain chemistry to adapt the individual to the Borg network.